19, 220. By 1966, Israeli-Arab relations had deteriorated to the point of battles taking place between Israeli and Arab forces. 221. Territory held by Israel. Before the Six-Day War. After the war, the Sinai Peninsula was returned to Egypt in 1982. In May 1967, Egypt massed its army near the border with Israel, expelled UN peacekeepers stationed in the Sinai Peninsula since 1957, and blocked Israel's access to the Red Sea. 222, 223, 224. Other Arab states mobilized the forces. 225. Israel reiterated that these actions were a casus belli and on the 5th of June, launched a preemptive strike against Egypt. Jordan, Syria and Iraq attacked Israel. In a six-day war, Israel captured and occupied the West Bank from Jordan, the Gaza Strip and Sinai Peninsula from Egypt and the Golan Heights from Syria. 226. Jerusalem's boundaries were enlarged, incorporating East Jerusalem, and the 1949 Green Line became an administrative boundary between Israel and the occupied territories. Following the 1967 war and the Three Numbers resolution of the Arab League, Israel faced attacks from the Egyptians in the Sinai Peninsula during the 1967-1970 War of Attrition, and from Palestinian groups targeting Israelis in the occupied territories, in Israel, and around the world. Most important among the various Palestinian and Arab groups was the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, established in 1964, which initially committed itself to armed struggle as the only way to liberate the homeland. 227. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, Palestinian groups launched attacks. 228, 229, against Israeli and Jewish targets around Fuad. 230, including a massacre of Israeli athletes at the 1972 Summer Olympics in Munich. The Israeli government responded with an assassination campaign against the organizers of the massacre, a bombing and a raid on the PLO headquarters in Lebanon. On the 6th of October, 1973, the Egyptian and Syrian armies launched a surprise attack against Israeli forces in the Sinai Peninsula and Golan Heights, opening the Yom Kippur War. The war ended on the 25th of October with Israel repelling Egyptian and Syrian forces but having suffered over 2,500 soldiers killed in a war which collectively took 35,000 lives in about 20 days. 231. An internal inquiry exonerated the government of responsibility for failures before and during the war, but public anger forced Prime Minister Golda Meir to resign. 232. In July 1976, an airliner was hijacked in flight from Israel to France by Palestinian guerrillas and landed at Entebbe International Airport, Uganda. Israeli commandos rescued 102 out of 106 Israeli hostages. Peace process. The 1977 Knesset elections marked a major turning point in Israeli political history as Menachem Begin's Likud party took control from the Labour Party. 233. Later that year, Egyptian President Anwar el-Sadat made a trip to Israel and spoke before the Knesset in what was the first recognition of Israel by an Arab head of state. 234. Sadat and Begin signed the Camp David Accords, 1978, and the Egypt-Israel Peace Treaty, 1979. 235. In return, Israel withdrew from the Sinai Peninsula and agreed to enter negotiations over an autonomy for Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. 235. On the 11th of March, 1978, a PLO guerrilla raid from Lebanon led to the Coastal Road massacre. Israel responded by launching an invasion of southern Lebanon to destroy PLO bases. Most PLO fighters withdrew. but Israel was able to secure southern Lebanon until a UN force and the Lebanese army could take over. The PLO soon resumed its insurgency against Israel. In the next few years, the PLO infiltrated the south and kept up a sporadic shelling across the border. Israel carried out numerous retaliatory attacks. Meanwhile, Begin's government provided incentives for Israelis to settle in the occupied West Bank, increasing friction with the Palestinians there. 237. The Jerusalem Law, 1980, was believed by some to reaffirm Israel's 1967 annexation of Jerusalem by government decree, and reignited international controversy over the status of the city. No Israeli legislation has defined the territory of Israel, and no act specifically included East Jerusalem. Therein. 238. In 1981 Israel effectively annexed the Golan Heights. 239. The international community largely rejected these. Israel's 1980 law declared that Jerusalem, complete and united, is capital of Israel. 236. Moves, with the UN Security Council declaring both the Jerusalem Law and the Golan Heights Law null and void. 240. 241. Several waves of Ethiopian Jews immigrated to Israel since the 1980s, while between 1990 and 1994, immigration from the post-Soviet states increased Israel's population by 12%. 242. On the 7th of June, 1981, during the Iran-Iraq War, the Israeli Air Force destroyed Iraq's sole nuclear reactor under construction just outside Baghdad, to impede Iraq's nuclear weapons program. Following a series of PLO attacks in 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon to destroy the PLO bases. 243. In the first 6 days, the Israelis destroyed the military forces of the PLO in Lebanon and decisively defeated the Syrians. An Israeli government inquiry, the Kahan Commission, would later hold Begin and several Israeli generals indirectly responsible for the Sabra and Shatila massacre, and hold Defense Minister Ariel Sharon as bearing personal responsibility. 244. Sharon was forced to resign. 245. In 1985, Israel responded to a Palestinian terrorist attack in Cyprus by bombing the PLO headquarters in Tunisia. Israel withdrew from most of Lebanon in 1986, but maintained a borderland buffer zone in southern Lebanon until 2000, from where Israeli forces engaged in conflict with Hezbollah. The First Intifada, a Palestinian uprising against Israeli rule, 246, broke out in 1987, with waves of uncoordinated demonstrations and violence in the occupied West Bank and Gaza. Over the following 6 years, the Intifada became more organized and included economic and cultural measures aimed at disrupting the Israeli occupation. More than 1,000 people were killed. 247. During the 1991 Gulf War, the PLO supported Saddam Hussein and Iraqi missile attacks against Israel. Despite public outrage, Israel heeded American calls to refrain from hitting back. 248. 249. Shimon Peres, left, with Yitzhak Rabin, center, and King Hussein of Jordan, right. Prior to signing the Israel-Jordan Peace Treaty in 1994. In 1992, Yitzhak Rabin became prime minister following an election in which his party called for compromise with Israel's neighbors. 250. 251. The following year, Shimon Peres on behalf of Israel, and Mahmoud Abbas for the PLO, signed the Oslo Accords, which gave the Palestinian National Authority, PNA, the right to govern parts of the West Bank and Gaza Strip. 252. The PLO also recognized Israel's right to exist and pledged an end to terrorism. 253. In 1994, the Israel-Jordan peace treaty was signed, making Jordan the second Arab country to normalize relations with Israel. 254. Arab public support for the accords was damaged by the continuation of Israeli settlements, 255, and checkpoints, and the deterioration of economic conditions. 256. Israeli public support for the accords waned after Palestinian suicide attacks. 257. In November 1995, Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by Yuval Amir, a far-right Jew who opposed the accords. 258. During Benjamin Netanyahu's premiership at the end of the 1990s, Israel agreed to withdraw from Hebron. 259. Though this was never ratified or implemented. 260, and signed the Y. River Memorandum, giving greater control to the PNA. 261, Ehud Barak, elected Prime Minister in 1999, withdrew forces from southern Lebanon and conducted negotiations with PNA Chairman Yasser Arafat and U.S. President Bill Clinton at the 2000 Camp David Summit. Barak offered a plan for the establishment of a Palestinian state, including the entirety of the Gaza Strip and over 90% of the West Bank with Jerusalem as a shared capital. 262. Each side blamed the other for the failure of the talks. 21 Century. In late 2000, after a controversial visit by Likud leader Ariel Sharon to the Temple Mount, the Second Intifada began. It would continue for the next 4.5 years. Suicide bombings were a recurrent feature of the Intifada. 264. Some commentators contend that the Intifada was pre-planned by Arafat due to the collapse of peace talks. 265, 266, 267, 268. Sharon became Prime Minister in a 2001 election. He carried out his plan to unilaterally rocket attacks fired at Israel from the Gaza Strip. 2001-2021, 263, withdraw from the Gaza Strip and spearheaded the construction of the Israeli West Bank barrier. 269, ending the Intifada. 270, between 2000 and 2008, 1,063 Israelis, 5,517 Palestinians and 64 foreign citizens had been killed. 271, in 2006, a Hezbollah artillery assault on Israel's northern border communities and a cross-border abduction of 2 Israeli soldiers precipitated the month-long Second Lebanon War. 272, 273, in 2007, the Israeli Air Force destroyed a nuclear reactor in Syria. In 2008, a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel collapsed. The 2008-2009 Gaza war lasted 3 weeks and ended after Israel announced a unilateral ceasefire. 274, 275, Hamas announced its own ceasefire, with its own conditions of complete withdrawal and opening of border crossings. Despite neither the rocket launchings nor Israeli retaliatory strikes having completely stopped, the fragile ceasefire remained. 276, in what Israel described as a response to more than 100 Palestinian rocket attacks on southern Israeli cities. 277, Israel began an operation in the Gaza Strip in 2012, lasting 8 days. 278, Israel started another operation in Gaza following an escalation of rocket attacks by Hamas in July 2014. 279, in May 2021, another round of fighting took place in Gaza and Israel, lasting 11 days. 280, by the 2010s, the increasing regional cooperation between Israel and Arab League countries have been established, culminating in the signing of the Abraham Accords. The Israeli security situation shifted from the traditional Arab-Israeli conflict towards the Iran-Israel proxy conflict and direct confrontation with Iran during the Syrian civil war. On the 7th of October, 2023, Palestinian militant groups from Gaza, led by Hamas, launched a series of coordinated attacks on Israel, leading to the start of the 2023 Israel-Hamas war. 208